Have you heard that Donald Trump and his administration are ordering the eradication of America's wild horses? Depending upon your algorithm, the answer to this question may be yes. But is it the whole story? Today, we're going to try to get to the bottom of it. Hello and welcome to the channel. As always, I'm your host, Morgan. This may come as a bit of a surprise to you, but I am a self proclaimed bleeding heart liberal and horse gal who never grew out of that pony loving phase of childhood. Heck, I was the exact target audience for the horse girl masterpiece that DreamWorks unleashed upon the world back in 2002, Spirit Stallion of the Cimarron. And I spent countless hours watching and rewatching The Saddle Club. But as I have grown and continued my education, I have come to realize that the issue of Mustang management is not black and white. I have spoken about this topic before, but it's back in mainstream media, and I have recognized some of the old talking points that are based on emotion and misinformation making the rounds once again. The difference this time is that Donald Trump's name has been attached to the topic in both some surprising and not so surprising ways. So it seems like it's time for me to once again talk about America's wild horses and burros. Before we dive into the video, however, please allow me a moment to shamelessly promote myself. Or go ahead and skip to this timestamp if you don't want to hear me yap about yours truly. First, the YouTubey things. If you find any value at all in this video, please consider giving it a like or even a share if you want to kind of fight back against some of that misinformation going around. If you don't like what I have to say or you think I don't know what I'm talking about, please feel free to give this video a dislike. I will definitely take that into consideration before I open my mouth again, especially about this topic. If you have anything to contribute to the conversation, either you agree with me or you'll want to let me know exactly why you disagree with me or why you think I'm an idiot or a terrible person for the things that I say, go ahead and put those down in the comment section below. I do love reading and responding to comments, both the nice and not so nice ones. So if you'll want a little bit of attention, you can get it there. If you want to see more of me and my content recommended to you, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I do have a goal of hitting 500 subscribers, hopefully within the next 12 months. So click that button and contribute to that goal. I would really appreciate it. If you want to see more just horsey things, please check me and Padme and our pals out over on our Padme and Pals at Padme Bebe channels. If you want to hear me yap about books, find me at Prickly Peruser or the Prickly Peruser in all of the spaces. If you want to see more of me, you can find me at the Reptile Goth or Morgan the Reptile Goth in all the places. If you want to kind of help contribute to the work I do here or even my academic journey, please consider checking out the Patreon or my GoFundMe. I would really appreciate it. No pressure though at all. I never want anyone to feel pressured. I'm just putting those out there. Now, let's get back to the video. On August 20th, 2026, the New York Times posted this article, and if I am correct, it is the one that put American Mustang management back into the mainstream news cycle. We will look at parts of this article later in this video, but I can't read the whole thing here because it is behind a paywall and I don't want to get into any kind of trouble. It is, however, full of emotional language and imagery that has likely sparked the spread of some misinformation, and this is why I'm making this video today. I do, however, have a couple of disclaimers before I really get to the point and we get farther into this video. Disclaimer number one, the horses and burros that roam the rangeland of North America are technically feral, not wild. They are members of domestic horse and donkey species, not truly wild species. Despite this, the term wild is what is commonly used when we're referring to them. So I will use this term in this video, even if the pretentious academic side of me cringes at the lack of technical language. For the sake of this conversation, I'm not going to dig my heels in on academic terms, especially since this is not an academic setting. So please keep that in mind. These horses and burros are technically feral, not wild. And if you were having an academic discussion, the term wild is not the term you would use. But since this is supposed to be accessible, we're going to just use the common terminology. My second disclaimer is that I am going to be sharing thoughts and opinions here that are not popular. If you are someone who follows or is connected with the wild horse advocacy world, please hear me out and truly consider my points before responding. Some of what I will say will likely trigger strong negative emotional reactions, but these are points and emotions that I have wrestled with for a long time to get where I am today. So just please consider everything that I am saying, not just the points that spark those emotions. Okay, now that we have the disclaimers out of the way, I want to go over some necessary background. And that background is a very brief history of equine evolution. Family Equidae, or the horse family, did evolve in prehistoric North America. If you have seen my previous videos about Mustangs, this information may seem familiar because I have covered it before, but it's been a while and I think it's worth revisiting, especially for the purposes of this conversation. So we're going to go through this pretty quickly. The earliest known horse evolved around 55 million years ago during the Eocene. Most people wouldn't even recognize it as a horse. Hyracotherium. Sorry, I'm really bad at pronouncing these prehistoric species names. Or Eohippus, or the dawn horse. All of these names are referring to the same creature. And it was a very small three-toed animal. Moving on from there, during the Oligocene, I may not be pronouncing that correct. Evolution nerds, I'm so sorry if you're listening to this and cringing. I'm cringing at myself too, I promise. Which was about 33.9 million years ago to about 23 million years ago, we get Mesohippus. During the Miocene, about 23 million to 5.3 million years ago, descendants of Mesohippus split into various evolutionary branches. The important branch, however, for modern horses was represented by Parahippus, which was better adapted to grazing on the grasslands that were evolving in what is now North America. From Parahippus, we get Merychippus, which evolved during the middle to late Miocene. It retained its three toes, but the lower leg bones were fused, which is really good for swift running. From Merychippus, we get a one-toed line. Pliohippus evolved during this early middle Pliocene. The Pliocene ranged from 5.3 million years ago to 2.6 million years ago. And this is the direct ancestor to the modern Equus. About 4 to 4.5 million years ago, the genus Equus evolved. This is our horses, donkeys, zebras, all those things. And this is the only extant genus in the Equidae family. Everything else did eventually go extinct. So, like I said, this is all horses, zebras, and donkeys. They expanded outwards from North America over ancient land bridges. So then this begs the question, when did horses disappear from North America? Because they did disappear. And that was about 10,000 to 8,000 years ago. There are multiple hypotheses as to why they disappeared, but the exact reason remains a mystery. And quite frankly, unless we build a time machine, it will probably always remain a mystery. So then, when did horses reappear in North America? Because we got them roaming wild now. Clearly, they had to show up again. And the answer to that question, it's very well documented in the history, was with Spanish settlers around 1519. It was first thought that horses did not spread throughout North America until after the Pueblo Revolt of 1680, and that they spread mostly by roaming on their own. However, there is now research that corroborates oral traditions of several Native American nations that are known to be horse people, suggesting that horses had actually spread through trade routes by the early 1600s. So, when and how they spread is still a little bit up in the air, but the point is they got back to the Americas around that 1519, and then during the early to late 1600s they had spread. So then, are modern horses native to North America? Simply, no, they're not. While the genus Equus did evolve in North America, it disappeared 8 to 10,000 years ago. That means that North American ecosystems evolved for 8 to 10,000 years without the presence of genus Equus. Genus Equus has only been back in North America for about 500 years at this point, which does not necessarily mean that they're native again because their ancestors evolved here or that they've been here for 500 years. It means that they're at best naturalized and at worst they may be invasive. I would argue that they're somewhere in the middle, but they're technically not native, and we do have native megafauna that does depend upon the grasslands, like American bison and the pronghorn antelope. So, uh, this whole conversation about horses in the North American ecosystems or any other ecosystems where you get feral species is something that has a lot of nuance and a lot of gray area because naturalized is not native. There is a distinction, and it is something that we do need to keep in mind, especially when we're talking about management and responsible just ecosystem management, wildlife management, and conservation. So now that we've gotten this prehistory out of the way, let's go ahead and venture back to the present day. And I want to do that by looking at a couple of Facebook posts because while it was the New York Times article that sparked the most recent mainstream wild horse advocacy flame, it was these two specific Facebook posts that I'm going to share with y'all that finalized my decision to dive back into this topic and make this video. So, this first post is by the Alt National Park Service, which is an advocacy group that I and many others respect. But it does contain misinformation, which I hope is unintentional because I do think that this group does a lot of good work. The post reads, the Trump administration has dramatically ramped up the sale of America's federally protected wild horses, and a NYT investigation found that some are ending up in the slaughter pipeline. Here's how it works. The Bureau of Land Management rounds up wild Mustangs from public lands and places them up for adoption or sale. Some sale eligible horses has been offered for as little as $25 each. Buyers are supposed to certify that they will not send the animals to slaughter, and federal law restricts the use of government funds for sales that result in commercial processing. But it was traced some government sold Mustangs through private buyers and livestock records onto trucks headed for slaughter facilities. In one case, a livestock trader reportedly received dozens of Mustangs purchased for just $25 each, with trucks arriving to remove them the following night. At the same time, these sales have surged. BLM sold 3,718 wild horses and burros in fiscal year 2025, up from 1,509 the year before. Horse sales alone jumped from 793 to 2,387, and taxpayers are already paying thousands of dollars to capture and prepare some of these animals for placement. The government can sell them for as little as $25, while a horse entering the slaughter market can be worth hundreds of dollars. BLM says it does not sell wild horses directly to slaughterhouses or known kill buyers. The problem uncovered by the investigation is what can happen after that $25 sale, and the government is not doing enough to stop federally protected Mustangs from being flipped into the slaughter pipeline. Now, what is said in this post is accurate. However, the way it is written is implying that the sales are being pushed. It's not talking about how the horses go from adoption to sale eligible or any of those things, because there are certain pathways that a horse has to go through to get to the sale versus adoption, and there are different guidelines. Some of these words seem to be taken directly from that New York Times article, and that article is, like I said, very emotionally charged, and we will look at it a little bit later. But again, my issue with this post is that it is worded in a way to imply that the current administration is knowingly just selling off horses to go to slaughter. And that is likely not entirely accurate. Now, I'm not defending this administration, I'm not defending the government, but spreading of misinformation does not help anybody, no matter what side you're on. And the wording and the discourse does need to push back on things that are posted that can contribute to the spreading of misinformation. Since the advocacy groups that are quoted in the article are groups who have come out with very strong opinions about just leaving wild horses wild, and that have advocated against any form of population management techniques. So I just want to make that clear. I want to make sure that we can understand where some of this emotion is coming from. And even though I will probably mention it later, one of the issues I have with the article itself is that the advocacy individuals and groups that are quoted that seem to have been asked for comment on all of this are not ones like the Mustang Heritage Foundation, which is a 501c3 nonprofit that does a lot of good work advocating for the Mustang breed and trying to get them in the public eye as the amazing little versatile breed that they are. But we're going to move on. Like I said, this post is not technically incorrect, but the way it's worded does help misinformation spread. And that's the problem with misinformation, is that it does spread because it has enough truth to it that people don't feel the need to fact check further. That is my issue. So now let's move on to this second post. And I saw both of these posts back to back. So when I saw them, it was okay, I need to talk about this now. So the second post is by Sarah Brown, who seems to describe herself as a digital creator, but I don't know much else about her. I just came across this post in the wild, so let's read it. There seems to be a bit of confusion as to what is really going on with the BLM Mustangs, as well as a lot of misinformation. The BLM cannot sell Mustangs directly to slaughter. That law was passed with the Wild Horse Annie Act in 1971. Once they passed that, our Mustangs became protected. Naturally, our government does a fairly shitty job at managing things, so eventually we had too many horses in holding. So in 2004, during the Bush administration, the Burns Act passed. This allowed for sales authority horses to be sold for $25 without a contract and without a background check. This was the three-strike program that advocates were pushing back on. If a horse went to an adoption, was adopted and returned, or went through an online auction and didn't get purchased, it would earn a strike. 3 strikes meant they were available for sales authority. But over the past 2 decades, there hasn't been much funding for that aspect of the Mustang program, so it was only responsible for about 20% or less Mustang placements. What did get funded were more successful programs like the Trainers Incentive Program. Trainers could pick up a Mustang and gentle it for the public, and once the horse had some basics on them, the BLM would pay the trainer $1,000 when the horse got in a home. Similar to what I do with the WSR Mustangs, or at least that was the goal. Sadly, trainers took advantage of the program and were fast tracking horses through piss poor training and collecting the money after 10 days, so that program ended. The next attempt at getting horses placed was the adoption incentive program. You could get up to 4 horses, keep them for a year, and receive $1,000 when you got the title. So people adopted as many as they could, stuck them in a field to find for themselves for a year, got the title and the check, and dumped the horses at auction where they went to slaughter. Are you beginning to see why sometimes I avoid the BLM Mustang people? Don't worry, they are not all bad. There are groups of people that have put together training competitions for the Mustangs. The Forever Branded and Teens and Oregon Mustangs are 2 examples of how they can get Mustangs trained, showcased, and adopted, all while promoting the trainers that do that. The BLM was supposed to have funded these programs something like $6 million over the next few years so these horses had help, but hosts screwed that up. The budget, Congress argued, and the government was shut down. Eventually, the Mustang budget was increased, but some of these programs didn't get the funding they needed on time to run a program. Hopefully, they will be able to return next year. But that increase in budget also means that the three-strike program is also funded and being promoted. Instead of being 20% of Mustang places, it has increased to 46. Pretty soon it will be half of our Mustangs being sold without the protection of a contract, without a title, and without anyone checking on their welfare after a year. There are, of course, people who will say that the range cannot handle all those animals. They will say that even as Trump has announced that he needs to open up land to rebuild our beef herds while blaming Biden for the high beef prices, those high beef prices benefited the mom and pop cattle farms. Their product was making money, and President of the United States has decided to instead open up public lands to lease to the welfare ranchers who will now set up prices for beef. That's why they want to zero out the Mustang herds. He literally said it out loud. The next thing people will do is try and make you feel sorry for the farmer. They will tell you they are the backbone of our country. They will wake up at 6 a.m. to take care of their cows and that they are feeding America. And I am personal friends with people that do that. I was giggling at my friend's post about Halter breaking her heifer. You know what they aren't doing? Waking up at 6 a.m. and trucking out to our public lands to check on the cows. The mom and pop beef producers do it on their own property without subsidies from the government. The people who want the Mustangs removed so they can lease the land are the Rockefellers, the Hiltons, Rupert Murdoch, Stan Kroenke, and the Wright brothers. That's just some of them. But those are the people that are using our tax dollars to raise beef to undercut the actual family rancher. So no, the BLM isn't selling Mustangs directly to slaughter. They have just opened up that loophole to funnel horses through. And it really seems like the people it hurts most continue to defend them. Okay, that was a really long post, but I do think it was an important one because that post actually did outline some of how the Mustang program works, and we will get more into it in a little more detail later. But it did point out that yes, the sales authority program has ramped up. And yes, I do agree that it definitely has to do with the priorities of this administration. I'm not denying that. But these are programs that have been in place for decades. They're just being exploited more now. And unfortunately, as you can see, the little bit of the history lesson there, I presume that Sarah is a Mustang person based on their page. I did scroll a little bit, but the Mustangs have been screwed over by the government. There's no way around that. That is just the truth of the matter. But the misinformation that does end up getting spread hurts the advocacy just as much as anything else does. Misinformation it just ends up getting people either confused or angry or not willing to take anything seriously when it comes out as misinformation. So that's why it's so important to be accurate when we're talking about these things, especially sensitive topics like the wild horse and burro management, because wild horses are one of those things that are an icon here in the United States. They are a symbol of the Wild West in that era, and they are protected for their historical value. If you don't believe me, we need to go ahead and take a look at the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act of 1971, which we've have looked at before here on the channel, but we're looking at it again. So first of all, there are a couple of point paragraphs that I want to specifically highlight, but the whole thing is linked below if you want to read it. It's one of the shorter legal things that we've looked at here, at only about 8 pages long. But I want to first take a look at this kind of first paragraph that sums up the overarching decision and law here. So, Congress finds and declares that wild, free roaming horses and burros are living symbols of the historic and pioneer spirit of the West, that they contribute to the diversity of life forms within the nation and enrich the lives of the American people, and that these horses and burros are fast disappearing from the American scene. It is the policy of Congress that wild, free roaming horses and burros shall be protected from capture, branding, harassment, or death. And to accomplish this, they are to be considered in the area where presently found as an integral part of the natural system of public lands. So, this is the point. They are federally protected, and one of the reasons for that is due to their historical value and their value to the American people that love them. If you dive into history, you'll know that mustangs have historically been seen as pests. There has always been an issue with ranchers and mustangs. That is something that is a very poorly kept secret at best. Mustangs and ranchers seem to have always been at odds. And please keep in mind when I say this, I'm just speaking generally. I know that hasn't been the case with some ranchers, but in general, they have been seen as pests because they graze in areas where ranchers would like to lease the land to graze their cattle. And horses eat a lot, cattle eat a lot, so that's where the conflict comes from. I also want to highlight this first section of powers and duties of secretary because it does talk about management. Like I said, we're not going to get into the individual bullet points or anything because it's just too long and this video is already long. So, jurisdiction management ranges, ecological balance objectives, scientific recommendations, forage allocations, adjustments. All wild, free roaming horses and burros are hereby declared to be under the jurisdiction of the Secretary for the purpose of management and protection in accordance with the provisions of this Act. The Secretary is authorized and directed to protect and manage wild, free roaming horses and burros as components of the public lands, and he may designate and maintain specific ranges on public lands as sanctuaries for their protection and preservation, where the Secretary, after consultation with the Wildlife Agency of the state wherein any such range is proposed, and with the advisory board established in this section 1337 of this act, deems such action desirable. The Secretary shall manage wild, free roaming horses and burros in a manner that is designed to achieve and maintain a thriving natural ecological balance on public lands. I'm going to go ahead and pause there because that's really the point, is that this act calls for management, and management based on keeping balance in the ecosystem. Because, like I said, horses are megafauna and they do a lot to the ecosystems in which they live. And if you do actually take the time to go comb through the studies and things that are available through the Bureau of Land Management's website, you will see that in some areas, so some herd management areas, HMAs. Even though there are large populations, the ecosystem is able to handle it, whereas in others, not so much. So there's a lot that goes into managing and maintaining not just one species, but the balance in the land and these natural spaces. So please do keep that in mind. And that is part of this act, is to try to set up guidelines and the responsibilities for management. But then, of course, in 2004, we did get the Burns Act, which is the act that is currently being exploited. It kind of created that loophole, although the sales program has existed, but just the Burns Act is the one that has made it worse. And it is the one that is making this loophole able to be exploited like we are seeing now. And basically, what it does is it calls for the sale of horses who are over the age of 10 or have passed or been passed over 3 times for adoption. So that's the 3 strike rule. And then when a horse gets over the age of 10, they are in general considered a lot more difficult to gentle and train. So that's why that age in particular is picked, because 10 is kind of that middle age point for horses. But now that we've talked about the actual Wild Horse and Burro Act and the Burns Act, we need to go ahead and take a look at the Bureau of Land Management's Wild Horse and Burro program page. So the main page here introduces the program, and it does provide links to various information such as history of the program, education, where to go to learn about the adoption and sales, and information on how to report the illegal sale and mistreatment of Mustangs and burros. And this is important because reporting on this and having the public step up and report when they see things is really one of the only ways that we can uh, keep these Mustangs from going to slaughter and things like that, because there's just not the funding for them to be posted at every single auction and combing through every single livestock sales place to find the shady individuals who do exploit these loopholes. But there are 3 popular links that, if you go to the right hand column, you'll see the popular link section. 3 of them I want to talk about now. The first one is the off-range corrals. And what off-range corrals are they are the holding facilities where the gathered wild horses are housed and cared for. Sometimes they are like corrals, and in some of these places they are more like pasture. In the New York Times article and other places as well, they are referred to as feedlots. And this language, I presume, was used specifically to evoke a very strong negative picture in most people's heads. But like I said, it's not accurate. While the corrals and the pastures may not necessarily be the most picturesque and ideal facilities that people would like to see these animals kept in, they are efficient, and that matters, especially when you're caring for feral animals, when you're trying to keep them fed, when you're trying to provide vet care for animals that have never been handled, and also when you're trying to get them in front of potential adopters, both in person and online. So these off-range corrals, they're just housing facilities. They're maybe not the most ideal, but they're efficient, and they're efficient enough to keep these horses fed and healthy. Some horses do better in them than others. And unfortunately, yeah, you will see injuries and fatalities if horses panic and things like that. That happens in the horse world, whether the horse is previously wild or grew up around people for its entire life. But the term feedlot It just bothers me so much in this conversation because it is used for a specific purpose. And that purpose is to evoke a very strong emotion, get clicks, and it does spread misinformation. So let's go ahead and move on, because the next link is the link to the online corral. And this is the platform that is its own like website that is the place where you can participate in the online adoption auctions. It's also the place where you can get your application and look at the guidelines, which the guidelines are available on the main Bureau of Land Management site as well. But the cool thing about this site is that even if you don't have an account and you're not approved as an adopter yet, you can still view the adoptable animals. I know, since I would love to adopt a Mustang one day, I scroll this a lot. I like to see what's coming out of different herd management areas and try to see the horses. You'll see some photos and you'll see some videos of movement. And it's also a way where if there's a horse that caught your eye, but you're not able to adopt this time, if you take down their tag number, they may be available at the next adoption events next time, and you can look for that specifically. And if you're ready to adopt during the next one, then cool. You can find them easily and bid that way. But the adoptions, I say bid because they are in auctions. You can get them a very inexpensive animal, but you will also see some go for thousands of dollars. So this is kind of like the Wild West, so to speak, of trying to find your perfect Mustang or burro, because you'll find burros and occasionally mules there as well. But we need to move on to the third link that I want to highlight, and that is the adoption and sales events link. And this is the page that talks about the online adoptions and lists all the upcoming live adoption and sales events. And the New York Times article paints a very specific negative picture about these events as well. But put a pin in that for now because we will talk about it later. But basically, these in person events are a way to get horses in front of potential adopters in person. And this is important because the online events can be overwhelming because of the sheer number of animals on the screen, and sometimes the platform can crash because so many people are bidding. And I mean, the website could probably be set up a little more efficiently, but it's the government, so we get what we get. And even though we complain, it doesn't mean shit. But these in-person events are important because they do get the animals in front of people who may not have noticed them on the online spaces. But keep in mind that the online and in-person adoption events have something in common, and that the adoptions are a bidding format. So you may not be able to adopt the horse you want, whereas sales, I don't believe, are bidding. I believe it's this is the price they're going for, but that may be different. I know it does vary as well. So keep that in mind, because when we come back to talk about this with the article, I know I will be making a point there again about that kind of format. So let's talk about the adoption program. And for the adoption program, you have to meet specific housing requirements to even be allowed to adopt. And once you get approved to have you can set up your account whether you're approved or not, but you can bid if you're not approved. But once you get approved, you need to participate in an adoption event, either a virtual one or in person, to be able to bring a Mustang home. And then if you do adopt, you are put under a 1-year adoption period. And during this period, there may be compliance checks to ensure that you are giving the horse the the housing that you have to per the contract, that you are keeping it healthy and doing all the things you need to do. But it is also my understanding that these checks are kind of rare depending upon where you are and the staffing and funding and all that jazz. And then during this year, you may not sell or transfer ownership of the animal, so you can't like give it to your bestie. You can send it to training with a trainer who is qualified to work with these animals, but you still have to maintain ownership. And then when that 1 year is up, to even get your official title, you need to obtain a signature from a vet or another professional to certify that yes, you have been giving this horse all of the things it needs to thrive. So that is the adoption program in a nutshell. If you have any more questions, please go and check it out because there's a lot of information. Now, the sale program. So we're kind of going to read over and talk about this page because I think it's important since this is the thing that all the discourse is really about. And again, we need to note that horses have to meet certain requirements before they're available for sale instead of adoption. So let's just kind of read through this page. As required by the Wild Free Roaming Horses and Burros Act, the Bureau of Land Management offers affordable opportunities to purchase wild horses and burros through its long-standing sale program. Purchasing an animal means immediate ownership and helps support healthy herds and healthy public lands. Basically, you'll get your title and everything right away if it's a sale versus an adoption. So, sale eligible animals are wild horses and burros over 10 years of age and or wild horses and burros that have been offered for adoption at least 3 times. Notice, at least. Sometimes the younger animals will be offered for adoption more. But I think this current administration is trying to crack down on that to make it kind of go faster, which is not surprising to me and it doesn't make it right. But that's just my understanding. So, standard sales. Individuals or groups may purchase up to 4 sale eligible animals every 6 months. They must meet requirements outlined in application for adoption and sale of wild horses and burros and bill of sale, including certification of intent to provide humane care. It has been and remains the policy of the BLM not to sell or send any wild horses or burros to slaughter. Sale fees start at $125 per animal. Upon arrival, immediate ownership is granted via a bill of sale. Titles are not issued. So that's a difference there. I don't really know the difference between that kind of paperwork, but basically you get your bill of sale, the animal is yours. But again, you still need to qualify for what you would need to qualify to be able to adopt. Group sales, ideal for sanctuaries because there are a lot of sanctuaries that will purchase these animals and just kind of give them the vet care and take care of them and let them live out their horsey lives. I have no issue with that. Preserves, ranches, trainers, and other organizations. There are trainers who will go and buy a bunch or a couple, work them through, and then move them on to a forever home and things like that as well. They must meet the requirements. They have to meet the requirements as well. Provide additional information for approval of group purchase. Contact the BLM at, and so for the group purchases, they do need additional approvals. And then the where to buy gives you the links back to the sales events and online corral and stuff. So the thing here is that they do have these guidelines in place, and it is something that we do need to keep in mind. Now, is it difficult to get around them? Obviously not. But I do know that when a person has been confirmed to be a kill buyer and going around and getting around those loopholes, they will be put on a no sale list. Can you get around that? Probably, because the system's not as good as it could be or should be. Like I said, these horses and burros are getting screwed over by the government, but that is nothing new. So I want to take particular note of the part that says sales prices start at $125, which that's also where the adoption prices start at is $125 too. By the way, that would be your first bid. Some people don't bid on a horse after you bid that 125, but that is the base price. So the sales start there as well. So if that is the base price, why are current articles stating $25? Well, That's not misinformation. If you take a look at this announcement from January 1st from the Bureau of Land Management, BLM highlights individual and group sales of wild horses and burros. We see that, yeah, they have been using the Burns Act and pushing for more horses to go through that particular pathway to get them out of the holding facilities, presumably, because it does cost a lot of money to maintain these horses. So let's read through this real fast. The Bureau of Land Management reminds the public that its long-standing wild horse and burro sale program offers opportunities for qualified buyers to purchase wild horses and burros, including options for purchasing larger groups. Purchased wild horses and burros can become trusted partners for a variety of activities, from trail riding to ranch work and national competitions. With proper training, attention, and patience, these animals can excel in just about any role. That's true. Sale fees start at $25 per animal. To qualify for purchase, buyers must meet the requirements outlined in the application for adoption and sale of wild horses and burros, including certifying intent to provide humane care. Upon approval, buyers receive immediate ownership of their purchased animals with a bill of sale. So it is reiterating a lot from the sales program page. Da, 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 da. And then it is reiterating a lot in this middle section of what we've already said. So we are going to skip a little bit to the last 3 paragraphs here. The BLM manages wild horses and burros on public lands to maintain healthy herds on healthy public rangelands as required by the Act. Wild horses and burros gathered from public rangelands for population management purposes are made available for adoption and or sale to qualified homes. Unadopted and unsold animals are cared for by the BLM for the remainder of their lives, which is actually true. There are horses that are deemed unsellable and unadoptable that do just end up being cared for the remainder of their lives in what's known as permanent holding. So, and that's something that's less known about, but it is a thing. As of December 2025, the BLM cares for nearly 63,000 unadopted and unsold animals in off-range corrals and pastures, costing taxpayers more than $100 million annually. Horses are expensive, and even just the feed bill can get high, and then that gets even higher if vet work or something needs to be done as well. At the same time, an estimated 73,000 wild horses and burros continue to roam public lands as of March 2025 and reproduce at 15 to 20% annually. Placing an animal into private care via adoption or sale saves taxpayers approximately $15,000 over the lifetime of each animal. That actually seems kind of low to me, and helps support the BLM's mission to manage and protect wild horses and burros on public lands. So basically, there's nothing groundbreaking in this announcement other than it's stating the $25, which is not on the Bureau of Land Management's main page, because for the base sale program it is $125, but as we can see, people are able to get in through the loopholes and get that dirt cheap price. And it seems to me, when I'm looking at some of the articles and some of the arguments, is that okay, it does cost a lot of money per horse to round them up and care for them and get them the base vet work that needs to be done before they can be adopted. And one of the things that I see is the issue with the price of sale or adoption of the horse. But then these Mustangs, most of them just wouldn't be adopted or sold if the base price was like $3,000. One of the things that some people who do really like Mustangs likes is that they can spend a very low price to get an amazing animal and turn it into like a $25,000 animal, even though they only spent a couple $100s. Um, that is part of the charm of being able to adopt a completely unhandled animal and turn it into something amazing. So that's kind of where we're at there. But now that we're talking about it, let's go ahead and circle back to and address some points from this New York Times article. And As a quick reminder, we're not going to read the whole article because it is behind a paywall and I don't want to get into any trouble for making it available for free publicly. So please bear with me. We're going in order of how the different things I want to address show up in the article, but there's so much more information in it if you do want to read through it. The main kind of story of the article, because there is a narrative in it, follows these allegations that a livestock trader, Brandon Jones, who I believe is from Ohio, I didn't put that in my notes, which is a oopsie on my part, but he took advantage, or allegedly took advantage, of the $25 sale price of Mustangs to purchase hundreds, I think 500 was the number I saw in the article, and then sell them into that slaughter pipeline. These are allegations at this point. I do, however, think that based on the evidence that is presented, that is likely what happened. But shady individuals taking advantage of the shitty system full of loopholes is not the same as the BLM selling horses directly to slaughter. Is it the same consequence? Yes. However, the misinformation that I have seen spread is that these horses are being sold by the BLM directly into slaughter, and that is misinformation. So I just think that we need to be very careful about how we talk about things, especially sensitive topics like this. But let's start getting into the points that I really want to discuss here. First of all, this little blurb talking about the price. The government can spend more than $3,000 to capture a Mustang and bring it to market, but sells each for as little as $25. A horse can fetch up to $750 at a slaughter plant. The potential for profit keeps buyers coming. They're not necessarily wrong there, but we have an issue with the $25 sales price, which personally I do as well. I remember seeing this announcement and I raised an eyebrow at it when it came out earlier this year. However, if you have an issue with the $25 sales price, why don't you have an issue with the $125 more common sale and base adoption price? That's my question there. And again, yeah, it could cost as much as or more than $3,000 per horse to round up and capture and get it to that adoption corral. But if $3,000 was the base price, even less of these horses would get adopted out. That's just the sad reality. Because when people think about purchasing or adopting an unhandled animal, they're not going to spend the price of an animal that has at least started training or is at least halter broke or knows how to stand for the farrier. They're just not. That's the reality of it. So, moving on here is kind of in that same light. We are talking about that. And I have these next 2 points. So, again, it's continuing on talking about the money aspect. By selling Mustangs at a huge loss, animal welfare organizations say the agency in charge of protecting wild horses is instead subsidizing their destruction. The BLM is saying to the public that slaughter is off the table, but they're doing it in plain sight using a third party, said Claire Staples, who runs a wild horse sanctuary in Oregon called Skydog Ranch. This is one of those organizations that, quite frankly, I don't F with. I'm pretty sure I've seen Skydog Ranch in a lot of, or quoted in a lot of the articles, and in junction with the other animal welfare Mustang advocacy groups who tend to advocate against even rounding them up and adopting. So I'm trying really hard to be fair here, but I'm also being open about my own biases here. So let me finish her quote. There are simple steps the Bureau could take to end this, but they are turning a blind eye, and the only ones getting punished for what is going on are the horses. Okay, here. So I can't necessarily disagree with the idea that the agency is subsidizing their destruction, because this push is effectively fast tracking horses into that slaughter pipeline. But what I want to push back here is the way that Claire here said they're doing it in plain sight. And I'm presuming that what she means is that they're selling horses to slaughter in plain sight, which technically the BLM is not doing that. Shady people are taking advantage of a shitty loophole filled program. Yes, the horses are getting screwed over by the government and something needs to change. But when you say that there are simple steps that the Bureau could take to end this, and instead they're turning a blind eye, what steps, Claire? What could they do? Are they funded to take those steps? Because based on numbers we're going to look at in a second, they don't have the funding to do it. And as much as I don't like defending the government, you can only do so much with the funding that you have. And unfortunately, under the current administration, I don't think that the system is going to be fixed. I'm just going to say that right now, and I will say it again later as well. But that is the harsh reality of where we are. So if you're going to say that there are simple steps that could be taken, outline them. Outline them with a funding plan. Because just knowing that there are steps that can be taken doesn't mean anything if the funds are not there to take the steps. So let's move on now, because I am going to get heated. About 73,000 wild horses roam federal public lands in the West, where they are protected from hunting or capture. For decades, in an attempt to keep the population sustainable, the Bureau has rounded up 9,500 on average each year and offered them for adoption, but it finds adopters for only about half. Yeah, adopting a wild horse is a very big responsibility and one that most horse owners and horse people are not equipped to take on, unfortunately. The rest go into a labyrinth of feedlots and pastures that the Bureau calls the holding system. Again, with the feedlot word, very corral system. My horses are kept in corrals. Do I have a feedlot? Tell me that. New York Times authors whose names I do not have in front of me right now. Tell me, wild horse advocacy groups, am I keeping my horses in a feedlot? Or are they just corrals? Because that's the housing that's available to us. The system now stores 58,000 wild horses at an annual cost of $100 million. Caring for them eats up most of the Bureau's $142 million wild horse budget. Which brings us back to the question of if there are steps that the Bureau can take to better protect these horses, which there are, but the funding is not there. I would presume that the funding needs to be at least twice to be able to start to make the changes that need to be taken to better protect these horses. And that's just a start. Horses are expensive. If you don't believe me, just go look at hay prices and supplement prices. And I'm willing to bet these horses, they don't get supplements and things like that. They're kept mostly on forage, which would be hay, but they do get like necessary vet work and vaccinations and things like that. And that's going to cost more when you're factoring in the fact that these are unhandled animals and the vets working with them are putting themselves in extra risk. So it's expensive. And if the Bureau is going to do better by the horses, the program needs a larger budget. Do I think that's going to happen under this administration? No. Unfortunately, I think that this system is going to stay broken at least until we get a new administration in. That is my very realistic opinion here, but let's continue. Over the years, Bureau leaders have floated various lethal proposals for reducing herds, including using sharpshooters, selling horses directly to slaughterhouses, and building gas chamber. The gas chamber one, that horrifies the fuck out of me even to think about, but I'm gonna say it for the first time here, there are fates worse than death. I'm just gonna put that out there. I'm not advocating for lethal methods, but please keep that in mind. We'll circle back to that point again later. But Congress, aware that the public wants mustangs protected, because we do, I am one of those people that wants them protected, believe it or not, based on the words coming out of my mouth now, has barred the Bureau from spending any money to kill healthy wild horses. It's also technically illegal per the Wild Horses Act for them to kill healthy animals. So the law would literally have to be changed. The recent surge in sales is not the first time the Trump administration has taken actions that indirectly enable horses to be sent to slaughter. During Mr. Trump's first term, a program that paid people $1,000 to adopt a wild horse had similar results. Yeah, because shitty people are going to take advantage of loopholes. And the adoption incentive program, I believe, is still live. I know I've personally looked into it. I do not have the ability to keep an unhandled horse at this time, nor do I have the time to properly dedicate to gentling an animal like that. So I haven't looked more deeply into it, but I do still look at the animals that are available. Project 2025, a policy paper by the Heritage Foundation that in many ways has acted as a blueprint for the second Trump administration, has argued that the Bureau needs to be able to cut costs by killing horses. That's true. They do have that in there. And said that Congress must enact laws permitting the BLM to dispose humanely of these animals. I don't think the Heritage Foundation gives a shit if they dispose of the animals humanely. That's my opinion there. And I don't think it has anything necessarily to do with ranchers so much either, because a lot of Project 2025 is very pro industry. And if you read it, ranchers would be screwed over too. So keep that in mind, put a pin in it. There are there are alternatives to the roundups that have left so many horses in storage. For 20 years, the Bureau has had access to inexpensive fertility control drugs delivered by a dart gun. They have been used to effectively to control a few wild herds, and the government's own experts have repeatedly urged the Bureau to use them more widely. That is something that I actually really support and I talk about in my private life. Fertility treatments are something that controls the bison herd on the island of Catalina, for example. Fascinating, by the way. They Bison are also non-native to Catalina and they do a lot of harm to the island, but that's something we can talk about later. This is about horses. So the interesting thing about the fertility drugs is that basically you got to go out and you got to dart the mares. It's like birth control. Mares are female horses for anyone who doesn't know. If you've gotten this far in the video, I assume you know something about horses though. So, yeah. But it turns out, and I don't have, if I find the source while I'm editing, I'll pop it up here, but I've seen these advocacy groups even poo-pooing the fertility treatment option because it's too traumatic. But the thing about wildlife management and conservation is that you have to be okay with a certain level of trauma. You have to. You can't find completely non-traumatic ways to manage wildlife responsibly, especially in a situation like what we have with the mustangs, where they are at best a naturalized species, not a native species, and these rangelands in some cases simply cannot support the populations. And for everything, including the mustangs, to maintain and be healthy, the population needs to be maintained. Because remember, these animals don't have natural predators here in the United States. Yes, we do have large predators like mountain lions and bears and wolves may grab a horse, but they would not be their preferred prey. So that is just the harsh reality of conservation and wildlife management, is sometimes it's not pretty, and sometimes you have to decide what level of cruelty you're okay with. And frankly, a fucking birth control dart is a lot less cruel than that same animal and their young that's born because they weren't on that fertility treatment starving to death because their habitat can no longer sustain them. Okay, I'm going to hop off that soapbox for a second so I can hop up on another one. So before we completely move on, we are seeing just the same bottom paragraph about the roundups. I do want to look at this last sentence here that I probably should have looked at before I went on that rant, but you know what? Hindsight is 2020 and I'm not going to refilm that rant. So, but because the Bureau is spending so much on storage, it has little left to make the changes that would save it from storing more. Again, their budget would probably have to at least double to actually be able to widespread implement things like the fertility treatments. And there's still red tape to get through. Yes, there are some herds that are being managed quite effectively with it, but then these advocacy groups have issues with that too. And then you have to look at, can you even get to the horses to administer the darts? And there are costs associated with that, and their budget really isn't that great. I know the 140 something million dollars seems like a lot, but it goes very fast, especially when you are maintaining thousands of horses. So they need a larger budget to be able to implement the strategies that would keep them from needing to store and care for more. Let's move on. And this is where the article is actually talking about the sales program. So, first, the Bureau has to show a wild horse can't be adopted. It does this by posting hundreds of horses at a time on its online adoption site. After a horse has 3 1-week listings with no takers, the law permits the government to designate it as unadoptable. Yeah, that is technically true. Is it shitty? And do a lot of horses that probably could be adoptable end up being deemed unadoptable? Yeah, but there's a lot of horses and not enough people who not just want to take on the responsibility of a Mustang, but are able and qualified to. Like I said, I'm someone who would love to, but I know that I'm unable to right now. I hope in the future I am able, but right now it would be irresponsible of me to adopt a Mustang, quite frankly. And I know there are a lot of other people like me out there. Then it can be put up for sale. It is an important legal distinction because a wild horse that is adopted retains its federal protections. When that is sold, lose those protections immediately. Not entirely true, because even ones that are sold, there is paperwork that you still have to sign saying that you will not legal or knowingly sell it into slaughter. They do not lose all their legal protections. This is misinformation at best. No, they don't have like the same title. The paperwork is different, but you do still have that same that that same requirement. And even right after this paragraph, they say that. So a sold horse still can't be legally killed, at least not yet, because the buyer is required to sign a contract promising not to slaughter the horse or knowingly sell it to anyone who intends to resell it. That's not losing the legal protection, babe. The legal protection's still there. Is it a very weak, shitty legal protection? Yes, but that is not losing its legal protections entirely. But if the buyer resells to a middleman without asking questions, the buyer is safe from prosecution. Yeah, that is the loophole. That is what is being exploited. Because as long as you say, oh, I didn't know, you're clear, which sucks. However, that won't necessarily save you from not being put on a no sell list. Do I think that this government is going to uphold that? Absolutely not. I have no faith in this government when it comes to protecting the environment or animals or science or anything like that. But that's the thing. To say that a sold horse has no legal protections is misinformation at best. And that's the thing that pisses me off so effing much. So let's move on. The middleman has not signed a contract with the Bureau and is free to legally sell the Mustang to slaughter. Yeah, that is the unfortunate truth of the matter, and it sucks. The Bureau is outspoken that it does not let horses go to slaughter even through a middleman, but it has a big incentive to get Mustangs off its ledgers. Yeah, that's an unfortunate thing too. Uh, that it is a shitty system. How many times do I have to say that? Is a shitty system. But the thing is, I do know that there are people that care about these horses that work in this program. It's just, you work with what you got, and unfortunately, what you got is terrible. That's the harsh reality. The government estimated that not having to provide years of care for the 3,700 horses it sold in 2025 saved about 56 million. That sounds about right. Yeah. Like I said, horses are expensive. And yeah, there's no other way to really get around that. And the thing is, The sold horse doesn't necessarily lose its legal protections, but there is that loophole that is being exploited. That is not necessarily the fault of the wild horse adoption and sales program, but it is also the fault of the wild horse adoption and sales program because the loopholes exist and are being exploited. But it's also the fault of government at large for not closing the loopholes legally. And even if the loopholes were closed legally, the harsh reality is that these horses would still find their way on those trucks headed out of the country for slaughter. I'm not saying that's okay, but shady people would figure out how to make that happen. So to put all the blame on the Bureau is asinine. Yeah, they should hold some of the blame, but not all of it. Let's continue. So this last little bit is talking about the in-person sales events. And like I said, there's a lot more in this article, but these are just the points that I really wanted to highlight and respond to. So it starts under the header, All the Missing Horses. Other people all over the country are flipping sale horses at a smaller scale. In April, the Bureau trucked 200 Mustangs to a dusty fairground in Poteo, Oklahoma. I don't know how that's supposed to be pronounced. For a 2-day adoption event. Um, yeah, that's how the adoption events work. The horses are loaded up in a stock trailer and trucked in. How else would these in person adoption events work exactly? This is a great opportunity to find your next partner and give a good home to a wild horse or burro, the Bureau said on Facebook. Yeah, it is. Like, where's the lie in that statement? A few people showed up to adopt a companion animal, but most gravitated to Mustangs the Bureau had already designated unadoptable and bought bunches of large horses that could be quickly resold. So, when you're saying that that is the intent of people purchasing the sale animals versus going through the adoption process, which even at these in-person events, adoptions are a bid, whereas I believe with the sale horses, you can buy it right then and there. That could be why people gravitate more to the sale horses so they don't have to hang out for longer and participate in bidding. Or maybe that sale horse is a horse that they've been tracking online and now they have the opportunity to come see it in person and purchase it and take it home. Like, there's so much nuance in what goes on at these events and what happens in the minds of the people who are uh, putting down the money to bring a Mustang home. So there's just a lot. I know that I've thought about it, and if I went into an in person event, I might be more inclined to go to an unadoptable animal and purchase one of those versus bid back and forth on a biddable animal. If I had my heart set on bringing a Mustang home, I might take some of that unknown of, oh, I might not win the bid out or the auction versus I'm going to go to the animals that are sales authority instead and pick one that I know I can go give my money and know that I can bring this animal home versus the anxiety of coming back and checking the clipboard to see if I've been outbid, to see if I need to put a new bid down. That's just my 2 cents there. And just because someone goes to a sale authority horse does not mean that they're trying to flip it necessarily. Yeah, there are some trainers that go and purchase the sale Mustangs with the intent of training them and reselling them. That's part of the horse world, babe. If that makes you uncomfortable, dismount and get the fuck out of here. But let's move on. There is no official tracking mechanism for these horses, but the Bureau brands every horse it captures with a distinctive serial number on its neck, so there are ways to identify where some end up. That is a bit of a contradiction because these brands are a way to track the horse. Now, no, there's no like microchip or actual there's no like you have to fill out paperwork every time ownership is transferred like you would in other breed registries and stuff. But that's a little bit semantics at this point. The brands of at least 55 of the Mustangs sold at the Oklahoma event showed up a few days later in Kansas and Texas, where the horses had been resold to large livestock auctions frequented by slaughter buyers, according to sales records gathered by wild horse protection groups. Yeah, because shitty people will do that. And any livestock option, there's going to be kill buyers or auction. Did I stumble over that word? I don't even know anymore. It's not just these large auctions that have kill buyers at them. Every single one will. But these larger ones are the more infamous ones because you will see the kill buyers picking up a lot of horses, and sometimes you'll see the horses pop up in their own online sales groups for you to spring them from slaughter. And that's where a lot of these quote unquote rescues that save horses from slaughter that go super viral, and then you never see the horses again get their horses. And that's also one of the effed up things that goes on in the horse world, especially because horses do inspire bleeding hearts, especially in gals and other folks like me. But that's that rant. That could be a whole video in and of itself. And I know this one's going to be really long because I'm looking at the camera right now and we're already almost at an hour and a half, at least in the recording. I know there's like pauses and things that need to be cut out, but this video is going to be long. Um, take a moment, get a sip, get a snack. I'm going to go ahead, take a sip of my coffee here to keep me going. Okay, now I'm ready. Let's continue on. The pattern has repeated at more than a dozen events. Wild horse organizations say they have documented more than 250 Mustangs that were bought from the Bureau and quickly dumped in the past 12 months, but said they have most likely missed many more. That's probably true. And that happens a lot in the horse world. Quarter horses are one breed that is bred a whole lot that has horses end up in these slaughter pipeline situation. And that is shitty. But it's one of the really hard parts of the horse world. It doesn't make it right, but one of the things that irritates me sometimes when I read articles like this is that the way it's worded and the emotion makes it seem like it happens more to Mustangs specifically than other breeds, which is not necessarily accurate, but let's continue on. The average age of the horses they documented was 5 years. A lot of the horses rounded up on the range, that would be their average age if you take into account the foals and the older horses. You don't just wildlife or life as a wild horse is tough. Living into those older ages, it's not easy. So, yeah, most horses, even if you go peruse the online corral right now, I'm willing to bet if you took every animal and averaged its age, which if I get sucked in enough, maybe I'll do that. Actually, no, that's a lot of data. If I do that or even take a sample of these horses, I'll pop that average right here. But if I don't, that means I did not have the mental energy. But I'm willing to bet most average ages, if you go to any of these events, if you take the online corral, it's gonna be about 5. That sounds about right for me. So that's like a young adult age for a horse. They're still growing, but they're not all the way a baby, but they're not all the way in their prime kind of age. So then let's wrap up the section of the article I want to respond to with this quote from Miss Staples from Skydog Ranch Sanctuary. It used to be rare that we'd see a Mustang at the auctions, and if we did, they were usually old, said Miss Staples. That's anecdotal. I don't know how accurate that is. But now we're seeing a huge influx, and most of these horses are young, 2 or 3 years old. They are the easiest to train and should be easy to adopt. You're seeing an influx because people are misusing and exploiting these loopholes. And yeah, it is part of the fault, or it is the fault of this administration by putting it out there and letting more people know. However, to get more of these horses into homes, more people need to know about it. And yeah, that's the thing here. We're gonna see more horses show up at auction anyway in the near future, not just Mustangs. because people just can't afford to keep their horses. I'm lucky that my family and I are able to afford to keep our horses. And unfortunately, a lot of people aren't. For me, my horses are the thing that keep me going some days. So if I had to give up something else to be able to keep my horse, I would 100%. But a lot of people, that's not how they are. And every situation is going to be different for everyone. And I try not to judge the decisions made by people who I do not know. But yeah, there are going to be shitty people that exploit the system, purchase the $25 horse, and then sell it at auction for a few hundred. That's a sad reality of it. Do I think that's a loophole that needs to be closed? Yeah. Do I have the answer on how to do it? No. Evidently, Claire does, but she didn't say what steps can be taken or how to fund them. So until then, I'm gonna kind of assume that's a little bit bullshit on her part. But let's move on because there is actually a push to make it illegal to transport horses out of the country for slaughter. And this push does happen every few years or so, and there have been bills that have ultimately not made it all the way through. So I want to read this article from Blood Horse, which is like a race horse on like publication. I don't know if they have a print version, but I do know they're online for sure. And thoroughbreds are another breed where people claim that they go into slaughter all the time when they're done racing, which is just not necessarily true. And the Jockey Club actually does a really good job tracking what happens to their horses. But this is not the soapbox for that. This is not the video for me to go on that rant. But this article is one that is relevant to us. So let's read through this because it talks about a bill that has been pushed through that they are trying to get through that I think for some weird reason has more of a chance of becoming law right now. But put a pin in that thought because it weirdly has to do with Republicans and Trump. So kudos there, I guess, but that's why I'm confused about the Trump stuff. The part of the story here that his name is attached in surprising ways. But let's read this article. It is from May 22nd of 2026. So a little bit aging because we're in August now, but still pretty relevant. I haven't looked to see if there's an update on this bill, but this article, I haven't seen any article saying it didn't pass through the next stage of Congress or anything like that, but it does take a while. So let's get into this. By a vote of 34 to 30, the United States House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee passed its 5-year surface transportation reauthorization bill, which includes a bipartisan amendment to prohibit the transportation of horses for human consumption. Following passage out of the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, the bill now awaits consideration on the House floor. The amendment was led by U.S. Representatives Jeff Van Drew, a New Jersey Republican, and Tina Titus, a Nevada Democrat, joined by Reps Tim Burchett, a Tennessee Republican, and Jimmy Patronis, a Florida Republican. The Van Drew Titus Amendment achieves the same policy goal as the Save America's Forgotten Equines Act, more commonly known as the SAFE Act, which has 230 co sponsors in the House of Representatives. The amendment's exact language was also included in the Surface Transportation Reauthorization Package that has passed the full House of Representatives in the 117th Congress. However, the amendment to include such language in the Senate package was not brought for vote. America's horses helped build this country. They carried our soldiers into battle, worked our farms, and remained beloved companions to millions of Americans today, Van Drew said in a release. They deserve dignity and humane treatment, not to be packed into dangerous trailers and shipped across our borders for slaughter. I am proud this amendment was included in the final Build America 250 Act because it takes an important step toward protecting these animals from unnecessary suffering. A ban on the transportation of horses for slaughter is backed by equine industry groups as well as leading animal welfare organizations, which is interesting because equine industry groups and animal welfare organizations don't always see eye to eye on things. I know on this, it's obviously something they would, but just, yeah. As a long time and active supporter of the SAFE Act, the Jockey Club is encouraged to see an amendment to the House Transportation Bill now includes the provisions to make it illegal under federal law to transport horses for slaughter, said Jim Gagliano, president of the Jockey Club. We join with the many other supporters of the SAFE Act in urging Congress to now pass this important act that will protect thoroughbreds in the United States. And, also other breeds as well, but this is a thoroughbred publication. The Jockey Club is the thoroughbred breed club here in the United States. So the NTRA is very happy to see language included in the Transportation and Infrastructure Reauthorization that would keep horses in the U.S. safe and unable to be shipped out of the country for slaughter, said Tom Rooney, president and CEO of the National Thoroughbred Racing Association. Horses in our care are world-class athletes, and it is imperative that we take care of them even when their racing days are over. This language safeguards our equine partners from any harmful loopholes that we would like to thank all of our partners in Washington and across the country for helping to get this done. Protecting these horses requires industry's advocates and lawmakers willing to confront difficult issues directly, said Aidan Butler, president of track operator First Racing. This action by the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee marks meaningful progress toward lasting protections for America's horses, and First is proud to stand alongside the Lost Horses campaign, bipartisan lawmakers, and the broader racing and equine community to help drive that change forward. Honestly, I support this. Like I said, this is a push that happens periodically. It has never passed all the way, but I'm more hopeful this time, surprisingly, because of this letter to Trump led by Vern Buchanan, that is the Republican representative of Florida's 16th district. Basically, I'm gonna pop it all up here. I don't think we're gonna read the whole thing, but because it's not super long, but the point of it is that earlier this year there was a stop on the export of live horses to Mexico because of the New World screwworm. And this letter is calling for, it is basically calling for Trump to push for this act to pass and for it to be signed into law that it is not legal for horses to be exported from the United States for the purpose of slaughter. Like I said, I have this letter also linked, but that is long and short of it. And honestly, I'm really surprised that this is really a bipartisan thing, and that Republicans are part of the ones kind of leading the charge. I don't know why I'm so surprised, because love of horses is something we see no matter where you are in the political spectrum. It's actually kind of a stereotype that the horse world is super conservative, but let me tell you, I know a lot of people in the Blue Pony Club. I'm one of them. But yeah, I am now watching this, and I do hope it passes. But because of this push, I don't know that the Republicans associated with it are MAGA Republicans, so I don't know how much weight they actually hold with the Orange Man, but I may look more into that. This is something I wanted to include here because it is part of this push to make it illegal to transport horses out of the country for slaughter, which is something I support, especially since horses that are transported out of the country for that purpose lose the protection of the United States, meaning that we can't guarantee that their ends are humane. And that would be the same for any animal being transported out of the country for that purpose, by the way. So, yeah, I'm going to go ahead and move on here. So, this section is going to be really anecdotal, but those of us in the horse community will recognize points made as unfortunate truth. And the thing is, we need to talk about some of the discrimination and the stigma when it comes to mustangs in the horse world. So, in most disciplines, not all, there is a level of discrimination based upon breed, paperwork, and bloodlines. And unfortunately, Mustangs do tend to be on the receiving end of this discrimination. This is something that many people are trying to change, but change is not something that happens overnight, especially in spaces like the horse world. Change happens very slowly in the equine community. It's unfortunate, but it's what we're dealing with. And because Mustangs do not have the fancy breeding that, say, your warm blood or your quarter horse do, they do end up being discriminated against a lot. And it's just because they're not the correct breed and they don't have that fancy paperwork and bloodlines backing them up. And honestly, I would hazard a guess that this is one of the things that has negatively impacted the adoption of Mustangs overall. Because when you're going to get a horse for a purpose, a lot of people, if they want to be competitive, will go purchase that horse that was bred for that purpose instead of the Mustang that a lot of people may see as a wild card that you may never actually tame down, or you'll train it, but it's a wild horse, so maybe it'll snap one day and seriously hurt you. I've ridden Mustangs before, and yeah, I've been bucked off of one, but it happens. Horses in general are large animals with a very high flight response. And yeah, a Mustang is going to have a heightened like fight or flight response because they have been wild, and that has probably been bred a little bit into them because that's how you survive out there in the wild. But that doesn't necessarily mean that just because of their breed they're crazy or they can't be amazing little horses. I love the Mustang breed. I think they are so adaptable and they can do so many things. But we need to continue. There is some good news though, because there is a growing number of people all over the social medias and organizations like the Mustang Heritage Foundation, which I did mention earlier. Fantastic foundation. I support them. They're so great. That are working to show that Mustangs are capable of holding their own against horses from elite bloodlines. The Extreme Mustang Makeover was an example of an event that was put on by the Mustang Heritage Foundation in partnership with the BLM that showcased the adaptability and trainability of the American Mustang as a breed. And it gave people the ability to purchase these horses that had undergone, I think it's 100 days of training with a professional trainer, to go straight from wild, unhandled to horse that's like going through a trail horse under saddle. And these horses were started by very passionate professionals because you had to qualify to even be able to get one of these horses to make over and then put into the event. The last Extreme Mustang Makeover was in 2025, and the event was ended due to the partnership between the Mustang Heritage Foundation and the BLM coming to an end, which is super unfortunate. I think that partnership officially came to an end in 2023, so there was 2 more years, but it is really unfortunate to see that event go. It is, however, being replaced by the Mustang and Burro Finals, which is more like a traditional show type environment, if I'm understanding things correctly, for these younger animals that have been adopted to showcase, again, how amazing these animals are. And then Mustangs are also very popular and beloved in like the endurance community because they are uniquely suited to navigating these tough terrains and long distances that endurance riding puts you through. So that's cool. That especially excites me because I see endurance becoming more popular. I know that I have hopes of breaking into that world a little bit, but for a long time, I don't think like your average horse person really knew what it was. I had kind of heard about it as a kid, but I didn't know what it really was. So I think that as endurance becomes more popular, Mustangs may become more popular, and hopefully we'll see more people actually being willing to advocate for, showcase the Mustang, and show people that they are a breed that honestly, like the quarter horse, can kind of do anything. But it is still important to keep in mind that working with feral horses does present very unique challenges, because starting an unhandled feral horse is simply not the same as starting a horse that grew up around people, whether or not that horse was unhandled. Even an unhandled horse that grew up around people at least has some idea of what people are. Some of these wild horses may have never seen a human until they were rounded up. And these horses that do come from the range that had little to no contact with people will have, or will likely have, a heightened fight or flight response when compared to one that has had any level of contact with humans throughout its life. Maybe that's a little bit due to just in their bloodlines that's there, because again, you survive, you survive in the wild because you know when to run and when to fight. And horses that grew up around humans don't necessarily need that, and in some ways I think that we do breed down the fight or flight instinct. But I haven't done enough research there to be an authority on that. That's just my speculation based on what I know about biology and zoology and things like that, and what I see anecdotally. And so there is also a dearth of people who are truly qualified to start a previously wild Mustang. Those who adopt without proper preparation or without working with a qualified trainer are setting themselves and their horses up for failure. Because working with a previously wild horse is not the same as working with even a horse that was raised in a pasture. These horses present very different challenges. And these failures, because unfortunately, when we see a failure, that's more likely to go viral than the successes in a lot of cases, because it's sensational. And these failures do add towards these negative stigmas that are put on the Mustang as a breed. It adds to the kind of stereotype that Mustangs are crazy and stuff like that, when that's not necessarily true, and it may stop people from even considering a Mustang in the future. But with all of this being said, I do still fully believe that Mustangs are amazing horses, and the breed as a whole is extremely versatile and honestly underrated. Honestly, if Padme hadn't worked out, I would have adopted a Mustang that I had gotten the pleasure of working with at a rescue that I did volunteer at in high school. Luckily, Padme and I were a match made in heaven, and Ranger, the Mustang, did find his forever home. But my aunt and I did talk about, even after I adopted Padme, that if after like a month Ranger was still up for adoption, we may have gone to look at him. So, with all that said, I do love Mustangs. I think they're great. But for me, I would be one of those irresponsible, unqualified people if I were to go adopt one tomorrow. So, now we kind of got to get on to the part where my thoughts and opinions will not be popular here, but please hear me out. Please note that I'm not necessarily advocating for some of the things that I'm saying. But first of all, we need to keep in mind that horses are livestock. This may seem obvious, but it is something that I think people either forget or don't like to admit to, because horses aren't used like cattle, chicken, pig, sheep, and other livestock animals, meaning that we don't use them for their products, if that makes sense. In my opinion, horses do tend to be thought of more as pets than livestock, and it is probably because, at least in the United States, there's no market for horse products, i.e., there's no market for like horse meat and things like that. The idea of horse products like horse meat does make people uncomfortable. I say this because I am one of those people. I don't like thinking about that. But I think that that is one of the issues that we do face here in the United States, is that there's no real way to calculate the monetary value of an unpapered horse without the context of riding, driving, or other disciplines. Whereas that's just not the same with like a cow or a sheep. There's a way to calculate its value, even if it's no longer able to produce milk or its wool is subpar. In other nations, horses do have value for their meat and other products. I that's just a simple fact. To be very clear here, I don't like the idea of horse slaughter, but I do see the logic in the value that it provides. And to be frank, there are fates worse than death. Like I have said, becoming emaciated, starving to death because there are no resources to be fed and sustain oneself, wasting away and over due to overpopulation and things like that. Those are fates worse than a swift death. In some areas, horse and burro populations simply are not sustainable. And even I know certain advocacy groups will say otherwise, but the science does not agree with them. Like I said, ecology, wildlife management, conservation, it's not always pretty. It is not for the faint of heart. Large animals like horses and burros do put a lot of strain on ecosystems, especially when they have little to no natural predators present, which is why management of these populations is important. Now, does that mean the management has to be lethal? Of course not. Personally, I would prefer the non lethal methods. We talked about the birth control darts, but sometimes that may be the most humane option. We see that with like hunting deer and things like that in some areas. But speaking of humane, part of the problem I see with the idea of horses being sent out of the country for slaughter, like I said before, that there can no longer be a guarantee that they are given a humane end because they're outside of the jurisdiction of US regulations. Now, with that being said, I do not think the infrastructure is currently in place to ensure humane treatment of animals being sent to slaughter in the United States. Um, and that goes for any animal being sent to slaughter. Obviously, we don't have horse slaughter here, but you get what I'm saying, I hope anyway. But it is certainly something that it should be part of the conversation, not just for horses, but for meat animals in general. We need to be able to guarantee them at least humane ends. That is the very least we can do. As uncomfortable it is to think about, being able to regulate that here in the United States would probably be a good step. But if we do pass legislation to no longer allow horses exported for the purpose of slaughter, then we need to figure out what to do with those animals here and how to ensure that they're not going to end up in very dire situations. And I just want to say, please do not interpret anything I'm saying here as me advocating for horses to be kept as meat animals or advocating for horse slaughter, because I am not. And actually, I would be firmly against people starting to farm horses for their meat, even if horse slaughter were something that became a thing that we did here. However, I am still pointing out that there are fates worse than death, and being useful after the end of your life or your products being able to be used is not necessarily a bad thing. Does it make me uncomfortable to think about? Yes. But it is something that I think is worth at least talking about. In a perfect world, we wouldn't have that. The horse slaughter would be off the table 100%, but we don't live in a perfect world. Do I realize that this could also become a slippery slope of people just dumping old, lame, and just animals that they don't wish to keep for whatever reason? Of course, I realize that. But this is also why kill buyers are a common thing at public auctions already. People already do that. Personally, I believe that it's my duty to give my horses a comfortable retirement, but not everybody feels that way or can afford to care for a horse that they no longer can ride or drive or whatever. The bottom line is, would I send a horse to slaughter? No. But if a humane end could be guaranteed, I don't think I would judge anyone who did make that decision. I also can't raise meat animals personally because I get attached to the animals in my care, but I don't judge those who do. I wouldn't have been able to be a 4 H kid raising a meat animal because I would not have been able to handle selling it at the end, knowing that it was going to Does that make me a hypocrite because I do eat meat still? Maybe, but I'm comfortable admitting that. And come at me all you want for that. I'm aware of where I stand, who I am. I know the animals in my care are happy and healthy. And if I did have to start raising my own meat animals, I would probably only eat chicken because uh, I don't have that same attachment to birds necessarily, but that's a whole nother story. Birds are kind of evil, but we don't need to get into that right now. Now, let's go ahead and wrap up this whole thing. So, America's wild horses are most definitely being screwed over by the government, but that is nothing new. Would I love to be able to blame the mismanagement of Mustangs and burros on Donald Trump and his administration? Hell yeah, I would. But that would partially spread misinformation because this mismanagement has been going on for decades, long before Trump took office, even in his first term. While this administration and Project 2025 have certainly made things worse and allowed for these loopholes to be exploited even further and even brought them to the attention of the more general public, wild horses and burros have always been in the proverbial crosshairs when it comes to public land use. Historically, ranchers tend to see them as pests and advocate or more demand that they be removed from the land so they can use it to graze their livestock, such as cattle. It's usually cattle. But the difference now is that the ranchers are also likely to be screwed over if the Mustangs and burros are successfully removed and eradicated in favor of the industries that are in bed with the current administration, such as fossil fuel, mining, logging, that that those things. The Mustang and Burro program does need more funding to do its job and fulfill its obligations, but that's unlikely to happen under Donald Trump, at least in my opinion. And honestly, it seems like, while others may disagree, it seems like they are kind of doing the best that they can with the shitty situation. And yeah, people are going to keep exploiting these loopholes as long as they're open, but they're not going to be closed until they can be closed at the top legally, unfortunately. These major reforms need to happen. I don't have the answers, honestly. I have some ideas, but I wouldn't know how to implement them. I would love to see like the Mustang Heritage Foundation and the BLM in partnership again, but I'm skeptical that's going to happen under this administration. I would also love to see more work being done to highlight how amazing Mustangs are as a breed and programs to help them get into forever homes. I didn't even start touching on like the prison programs and stuff where inmates gentle these horses and then they get auctioned to buyers. Those are programs that happen in several places that are super good for the inmates and the horses. But there are a lot of programs. Funding is usually an issue though. And honestly, under this administration, I suspect these programs are going to not have the resources they had before because if I had to hazard a guess, yeah, I would think this administration would love to be able to just take the lethal option. But that's speculation on my part. Please note, that is speculation. It is also important to note that horses are expensive to own. It's a big commitment, even with ones that weren't previously wild. Sorry, I'm starting to trip over my words. This is going to be a really long video, but we're almost done, I pinky promise. The other thing that needs to happen is that more pushback against misinformation being spread by these self proclaimed advocacy groups needs to occur. Wildlife management is not always pretty, and many of these groups are using the ugliness as a reason to advocate against responsible science based management. A lot of these groups ultimately what they put out is that their only solution for management is just to leave the horses alone 100% to do whatever they want. But that would lead to overpopulation in ecosystems that simply cannot sustain large populations of horses. That's the long and short of it. The populations do need to be managed. These are feral domesticated animals. that are living in a wild situation with no natural predators. It does not matter what these groups say, they ignore the science a lot of the time when you present it to them. But like I said, wildlife management's not always pretty. Rounding up the horses and getting them into homes is one of the best options. Darting with fertility treatments would be a great option too, but a lot of these groups don't like the idea of that either because of the trauma that would go along with it. But you gotta be okay with some level of trauma, especially for responsible population management. You just do. I am hopeful that this scandal will lead to reforms in the wild horse and burro program, but I don't think that any changes are going to happen in the near future. I think they'll likely happen in the distant future, perhaps after this administration is no longer in power. In the meantime, all I'm asking is that if you see misinformation, please push back on it. But most importantly, spread the love for the amazing little horse that is the Mustang, because they are such a really cool breed that is truly a living symbol of the time when the Wild West was alive. That's all I have for you today. Thank you for sitting with me through this one. It was a long one, I know, but I had a lot that needed to be said. And if you did stick with me through the end and you don't hate me, awesome. If I said things that really upset you, please feel free to let me know about it in the comments. I promise I won't take anything too personally. I do understand that some of the things that I have said will make people unhappy and uncomfortable because they make me unhappy and uncomfortable, but it's just kind of how it is sometimes. And like I said, we have to be willing to accept a level of cruelty in things like this because a little bit for a lifetime of thriving is better than doing nothing and letting animals waste away due to overpopulation. But I'm going to get off of this soapbox. If you found any value here, please consider giving this video a like, maybe even share it. I think this is one that is kind of important because I am doing my best to push back on some misinformation that is being spread and sensationalized. If you hated what I had to say here, go ahead and click the dislike. Like I said, I will take that into consideration next time I put a video out. If you have any thoughts or opinions to add, please put them down in the comment section below. And I would love having conversations about this topic with anyone that agrees with me or anyone that disagrees. Or if you own a Mustang, I want to hear about it. Let me live vicariously through you, babe. But if you want to see more of me and my content recommended to you, please consider clicking that subscribe button. I am trying to hit 500 followers sometime, or subscribers, excuse me, sometime in the next 12 months. I'd love it by the end of this year, but we are currently at the end of August, so I'm not very hopeful about that one. If we did get there, it'd be real cool though. And if you want to find me in the other places, I am Morgan the Reptile Goth everywhere. Or if you just want horsey things, Padme and Pals, Padme Bebe is the @ everywhere. If you want bookish things, I'm the Prickly Peruser in the places. If you want to support the work that I do here, I do have a Patreon. And if you want to contribute to my education, because I am working on my master's, studying wildfire ecology and forestry, I'll have a more concrete master plan solidified, not this current semester, but at the end of next semester. But there is a GoFundMe for that. No pressure for any of that stuff. I'm just throwing it out there. But no matter what, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, afternoon, evening, what have you, and I will see you all in the next one.